All right, thanks. Thanks for the confirmation. So, welcome again, guys, in the AWS Networking Basics Introduction course. So, in this course, there are two different parts. First of all, we will make sure that we understand the basics of networking. So, maybe you already have the experience in networking, or you know, on a basic level that what exactly networking is, how does it work. But just to make sure that we don't have any loopholes in that part, we are going to cover the basics of networking first, so that you can call it the phase one, right? So in phase one, we will understand the basics of networking. And then phase two will be how do we implement networking in AWS, right? So, of course, if you have completely no knowledge at all about AWS, that's okay, because we will cover the basics of AWS here. Not too much in detail, because more we are going to concentrate on the networking part of it, but we will understand the core technologies or the core part of the AWS services or cloud services that we have. And then we will have a lot of labs as well, so that we can also see this in practical. And the idea is that by the end of this course, you should be comfortable with the AWS management console and how to navigate through it to create your own resources, and how to learn more about AWS once you know how to use those resources, right? Because to be honest, there are more than 200 AWS services which Amazon provides, and the list is growing. So what happens is that it's not always possible to know and remember or even use all these services, and nobody is actually expecting you to know everything. But just like in any other technology, there are some certain core services like compute, storage, databases, or networking. The networking being the focus here, we should be comfortable with the basic idea of that, so that we can start exploring more about those services, right? I see someone else has joined. Hey, Kenneth, welcome to the class. Good to see you back. So yeah, we have just started the introduction, Kenneth, and the transit gateway, we will cover the basics of it. There might not be a lab for this, but we will cover the idea and exactly the logic that how it works in the VPC and how we can actually use it. And especially also in internet gateways, if you want to internet facing communication or between different AWS accounts as well. So those things we will understand. But what I was mentioning earlier is that we will take this course into two phases. Phase one will be the basics of networking, just a refresher, and it will be a smaller section. We will just make sure that the basics of networking, IP addressing, subnetting is clear before we move on to implementing those things into the AWS scenarios, right? That will be the phase two. So let's see the structure of this course, and then we'll see what exactly I'm going to cover into this course. So today will just be an introduction, and then we will start the actual classes from or the actual content delivery from the next week. All right, so let's get started. The very first thing, what is the course structure? So as you can see that we have the live Zoom sessions. That is, we are going to have every week for the next minimum at least 8 weeks. I'm saying at least because in this course we will see that depending on the pace and depending on what content we are covering, we will definitely take minimum 8 weeks to cover all the basics. But it might also go to 9 weeks in case if we deem necessary, or if we think that there is something extra that also we need to cover. It can go slightly more also, but definitely we will have 8 sessions where we want to cover the phase one and phase two. And this will be one live session per week where I'm going to explain you the concepts. And if there is a lab associated with that particular topic, we are going to do the lab as well. Some labs might be bigger, so we may have a dedicated session just for the labs in the later part of the course. So we will decide exactly depending on the content, depending on the topic of the day. And these sessions are 2 hours per session, but mostly I always say this in my classes that sometimes it can go 1.5 hours, sometimes it can go more than 2 hours, depending on the topic again. So it's a topic driven course, not the time driven course. So, but a rough idea is that it will be around 2 hours session, right? So what we are going to cover in this course is the in-depth theory of the basics of networking, we start with that. And I mean not only just the basics of networking, but how the AWS implements the networking module, or how does the VPC plays a big role, or the different kind of gateways play the big role into the communication between different services, right? So AWS basics are definitely going to be covered. That's what I was mentioning earlier, that although our emphasis will be on the networking part of AWS, but we will briefly cover also exactly what cloud services are, and how does AWS, or what role does AWS play into the cloud market, and also what are the core or important services that AWS has. So you will see that there will be multiple practical labs also to solidify our core concepts and to become comfortable basically with the AWS infrastructure. Although this is a basic course, so we are not going to cover the AWS CLI, because that is something you start learning once you get to the slightly more advanced level. But to be honest, once you have the idea or the logic of how exactly a particular topic works, if you know what is an EC2, if you know what is a S3 simple storage service, or elastic block storage, then you can start exploring the particular commands based on that as well. Because CLI is like an added advantage. Once you know how to use CLI, you will see that it becomes easier, especially for administrators, to manage things quickly and using the API calls and using the software development kits. But it's not required for understanding the core concept and to set up things uh, on the basic level, which you can do from the GUI as well. Right. So apart from this, you see that we will have a few hands-on practicals also on real AWS resources, so that we can get a feel of exactly how we can actually use them. I see a question from Mike that will we cover anything with Terraform. So yeah, we will have the basics cover. I mean the logic of the Terraform, but again, practical wise, we will keep it very basic, just connectivity and connectivity between different EC2s within the availability zone, between different availability zones within the region, between different regions, or maybe across account communication, and few services that we want to make it available over internet. So we will basics part we will keep it there, but the concept I'm going to touch there, because it's on the basic networking part. So we will not have any implementation part of that. Apart from this, there will be a Q&A at the end of the session, so that if you have any questions, you can ask, and if you have any particular uh, doubt about the lab or about a particular concept, definitely you can ask. But you can also join our Facebook group if you haven't already, where you can ask your questions there. Or when you are watching the recordings, there will be a comment section below every recording. You can also ask questions there as well. When you post question there, it directly comes to me. So there also I will be able to answer your questions. Another important thing about this course is that you will have lifetime access to the session recordings on our portal, on our website. So if you missed a particular session, or if you just want to go through it again, you can definitely go and access it on the website, and it's a lifetime access. So even in future, if we update this course, we add something more, or we modify something, and we actually update our website according to these new recordings, you will get access to those new recordings as well, even if it's like after a couple of years or after a few years. Whenever we decide to change it, maybe in few months also, every time there is a change, you will get the access, because you will have lifetime access to the recordings. And also, as I mentioned, lifetime access to any updates to the code that we are going to do. So we are also going to do a web server FTP server project on Linux at the end of the course, so that we can see how exactly the resources that we have in AWS can be accessed from anywhere throughout the world. And because the public IP address is also part of the virtual machine implementation, so we can have these kind of configurations easily accessible from anywhere, right? So let's talk about the course curriculum. What exactly are we going to do? So I have divided this into two different parts. Phase one, we are going to talk about the basics of networking, because of course if we are going to talk about AWS networking, we need to be comfortable with the networking itself first, right? So it is something that you might already know very well, or you might have done it before, but just to cover the basics again or clear any loopholes, we are going to quickly go through the networking logic, the OSI TCP/IP models, IP addressing more importantly, because that's what we will be using all the time, those different subnets. So IP addressing is subnetting. That's the important part. And the basics of switching and routing. So we are not going to go in depth on switching or routing, but the idea, what is switching, what is routing, and what do we mean by a gateway, so that we understand how different gateways work within the context of AWS as well. And then we will also have a lab. It's a theoretical lab, but just submitting questions so that you can refresh your submitting knowledge again, or just practice submitting a little bit more before we get to the availability zones and different submitting implementation into these availability zones. All right, I see a question from Mike that when you joined the course, it was question said that this will be a 52-week program. All right, so yeah, Mike, so there are two things. One is the Zero to AWS course, which is our recorded sessions for the certifications. Like we can actually go for uh, starting with the basics of AWS, and then all the certifications that we have, the cloud practitioner, then solution architect, associate, then professional, and then networking expert. So that program is a 52 weeks program, and that you have joined. You will actually gain access to that from the portal. But the live program where we go through the session live every week, this is just a basic networking program. So it is like an add-on to that actual program of Zero to AWS, which is 52 weeks. So definitely that one will go for 52 weeks, and that will have very in-depth knowledge of all the way to the solution architect, associate, and then professional, and then networking expert certification as well. This course is more about the networking basics. So anything that you see that, okay, this is something that needs to be covered in more advanced part, that will be covered in the Zero to AWS course. This is AWS networking basics, which is live. Zero to AWS is pre-recorded, which you will gain access every week for the next 52 weeks. So don't worry, you do have access to that 52-week program as well. And yeah, the Facebook group, I think in the welcome email, Christian must have sent you a link to join the Facebook group. But if not, I will also send you. We basically have the community of our students who are from different parts. Like some people are from CCIE, some are doing CCNP, some are doing Linux, some people are doing AWS. So it's a nice community where you can ask questions, and other people can also chip in, or maybe they are also thinking about the same questions, so they can get the answer when I reply there. So that's just a group for our Kanutul family. Right. So in the phase one, as I mentioned, we will have one lab, subnetting lab, just to refresh the subnetting knowledge. And then start the phase two. So as I mentioned that this is the networking basics class, the live class. So of course, the 52 weeks Zero to AWS, that's very in-depth, covers all the different topics. But here we want to just make sure that we become familiar with the practical aspect of it, how to use AWS services from the AWS management console, and also we test the networking part of it, right? So we'll see that we started as if you have absolutely no idea about about AWS. So we start with the introduction to cloud services. What is cloud? Who are the major players? Amazon, Microsoft, Google. And then how does the Amazon implementation work, and what are the different nomenclature we use in AWS as far as the cloud services are concerned? So introduction to the AWS regions and availability zones, because when we think about the global infrastructure of AWS, how does it actually use its data center? So we'll see that the cluster of these data centers, known as availability zones, they are connected with highly redundant links, backup links, and within few milliseconds latency, you can communicate from one AZ to another AZ. And a region is actually a cluster of these availability zones. and there are many multiple different AWS regions. So we will understand that part as well. And every time we cover some certain topics, we are going to talk about the theoretical aspect of it as well. So this is a more hands-on course where we will try to do more labs. But of course, there are some topics which we should be very, very familiar with. For example, identity and access management. IAM is the core part of AWS when you are starting AWS, because that's the access part, right? You want to make sure that anybody who's trying to access the AWS services is properly authenticated and authorized. So what are the different ways we can use? Like some of the examples we will see, like if you are using the AWS Management Console, the browser-based GUI for AWS, you can simply use your username and password. And optionally also you can use, although recommended, you can use MFA, multi-factor authentication, so that any user account which is created, they will be able to log in and use the AWS services based on their role, based on their authorization, right? How much they can do. But there are more and more requirements of doing things using CLI or using other softwares who want to retrieve some information from AWS or change some information from AWS. So these softwares use APIs, application programming interface, which is like a gateway between AWS service and the software or application that you are using. So when these programs or any software development kit SDKs, so when these programs CLI, SDK or API, when they want to use AWS services, there is no user login involved in this. We are just requesting access to some services, and based on our authorization credentials, we get those services. So for that, we also get something called access key ID and secret access key. So just to give you an example, that we are going to cover IAM concept as well, to understand that exactly what are the different aspects and how this becomes the most crucial part initially to make sure that your AWS access is completely secure, right? There are other services also. For example, we are also going to discuss about the different EC2 instance types. And depending on your organization, you will see that sometimes we need heavy data. We have heavy data usage requirements, so we should use the family type D. We have more memory optimized server requirement, then we can use the family type R. So these I'm talking about the virtual machine that you can create on AWS, called the Elastic Cloud Compute or Elastic Compute Cloud, EC2. So there are different families you will see. For example, if you see capital T, so the meaning is cheap. It's the lowest cost. So if you just want to practice AWS using the free tier account or want to pay a very little amount, you can actually use the T series, and it says T2 Micro, T2 Nano. There are different families or names based on how much hardware resources will be available. So these things also we are going to cover logically also, or the logic of this part also in our course. Apart from this, you will see some aspects which are completely theoretical but important to understand the distinction, like different types of storage that we have. There are persistent storage options like S3, Glacier, Elastic Block Storage, and EFS. There are transient block storage types like simple queuing service or simple notification service. What is the difference between these? And there are some ephemeral services like EC2 Instance Store or Memcache. So you will see that these things are not directly attached or directly connected to networking, because our focus will be on networking part, but we will touch upon this just to understand the logic of these concepts, like different types of hard disk drive that you can use in your virtual machine. You can use the input output optimized solid state drives or general purpose solid state drive. What is the difference between these? And then we can also use the hard disk drive, which is the cheaper option basically when your usage is not that much, right? So these kind of concept also we are going to cover. Same thing when it comes to networking. You will see that networking means you are enabling communication, and when you enable communication, you want to secure your network. You want to secure your resources. So there are two different aspects of security we will also cover in our course: security groups versus network ACLs. For example, security groups are basically the firewalls which work on the interface level of your virtual machine. So it actually associates itself with the virtual machine, or the vice versa. The virtual machine is associated to a security group, which is basically a set of rules. What is allowed and what is not allowed. It's a firewall, right? So this associate strictly to the instances. On the other hand, the network HCL that you create, they work on the subnet level. That's why subnetting knowledge is also important, because you will see you can have multiple resources part of the same subnet, and then you can secure them using the network HCL. But the difference you will see that, and we'll see examples also, that is stateful versus stateless. What exactly does it mean, and how they impact different aspects, and where would be the best practice to use security groups versus network ICS. So just to give you a few examples, we will cover these different aspects as well. So then we are going to talk about the core cloud services, because as I mentioned that AWS has more than 200 services, and there are so many different things. It's no mobile, it's no cone, Lightsail, and Lambda. You hear so many things, and you think, okay, do we need to know exactly how everything works, or do we need to know at least the definition of all these things? So yes, as you go through the certification path, like cloud practitioner, security associate, security analyst, or network expert, then you will see that more and more services will be introduced, and you need to have the basic idea of it. But for the practical purpose, when you are trying to implement few services, you will see that the core cloud services are very important, especially the compute, storage, and networking. Database, to be honest, although it's a core service, but that pertains to a particular requirement, that if you want to have a database server, you want to have a backend database like SQL or NoSQL kind of databases. But the basic idea should be clear in that part as well, like DynamoDB, how does it work, or how does it help comparing to other options, or what other different options do we have here. But the core part is compute, storage, and networking, because to be honest, if you want to enable networking, you need to have resources, then only you can enable communication between them. And the best resource we can use, or the easiest resource we can use with the basic knowledge of networking or computing, is the virtual machines compute part, right? And the storage, we have the storage which is attached to the instances like EBS, or we can have the general purpose storage also, which is called S3, simple storage services. So how we can actually utilize those services and how we can use them. So those basic concepts should be clear, with the focus on the networking between them, right? And that's what we are going to do in this live course. Apart from this, we will also understand few other services basics, as I mentioned, if, like Terraform, or some kind of certain gateways, how do they communicate? Load balancers, because so many times we don't want to use just one virtual machine. Maybe our website or our application has lots and lots of inbound requests coming from internet. So it's better to implement this on multiple virtual machines, and then use Elastic Load Balancer or ELB to share the load between different devices. So to understand the load balancer concept, very important. Route 53 DNS is one of the very important things. So what happens is that you want to have your resources accessed using the names instead of IP addresses. Then you need to have the name to IP resolution, or the pointer records IP to name resolution. So of course you can have your own DNS servers, or you may be using a third-party DNS server. But AWS or Amazon also provide a DNS service called Route 53, which is very efficient and very easy to use. So we will see the basic part of the concept of those as well. So you can see that these are not the core services, but equally important services, or important to add on the value to your core services that you are trying to provide, right? Also, when we talk about the networking, of course, we need to understand the virtual private cloud, VPC, right? So we have to have a detailed understanding of how VPCs work. How do they actually interact with the availability zones, regions, and how do they interact across multiple availability zones, or multiple regions, or even cross account communication? Is it even possible? Or if it is, then what kind of equipments and what kind of implementation is involved? So VPC is the basic building block of your networking in AWS. So definitely we will have a good understanding of this, and we will see also that how we can create our own VPCs instead of using the default VPC which is provided. Whenever you want to create a new VPC, you will need to have a block of subnet that you are going to use, And that's why subnetting basics need to be refreshed before we get to the networking part of this course, right? So apart from this, we will have some labs in phase 2 as well. So mostly what we are going to do is we are going to understand the basics of it and then get the comfort level with the AWS management console. So you will see that we will start with setting up a free tier AWS account. So if you already have an AWS account, you can skip this one. But anyone actually can create a free tier AWS account to try all these different services. Of course, there are limitations to different services, how much you can use, and some services are not free at all. But so many core services are free to use up to a certain point so that you can always practice them without actually incurring any charges. So we'll see that. Also, we will see another lab where we will create users and groups. What is the importance of groups? Although I did not mention it here, we will also talk about the roles and setting up the multi-factor authentication for the root user account and other user account to solidify our security setting and making sure that we are only allowing the legitimate users to access our AWS account. We'll also create some virtual machines. Mostly we will actually keep it to Linux servers because our focus here is not to learn the system administration or to learn the server side configuration, but to see how AWS interact with these services and how we can utilize them, right? So we will use EC2 virtual machines, couple of Linux servers so that we can see how to enable communication between them and how to enable communication to them from internet and vice versa. So we'll set up few VMs here. We'll see how exactly we can do that with using AWS Management Console. And of course, setting up the VPC to enable communication between these different VMs. And the virtual private cloud, if they are part of the same VPC, they will be into the same subnet depending on the availability zone. But we will see different permutation and combination that we can use. Same VPC, different AZs or different VPCs, and then we want to enable communication between them. How exactly does it work? How the routing gets involved? That's why the basics of switching and routing is also kept in the phase 1 part, right? So we'll see the VPC setup here. So within the availability zone, across the availability zone, or even across multiple regions. So we'll see the examples of those. And then we will also see an example or like a kind of a project where we will configure Apache web server on the Linux EC2. So this one will actually involve using an Apache web server and then setting up access from internet. And if you want HTTPS access, then you need to have a certificate also assigned to it. We can also place it behind a load balancer so that we don't need a public IP address necessarily. The load balancer will have the public IP address and the certificate will be needed for the load balancer, not for the Apache web server. So we will see exactly how we can enable these services. And also we can configure the Linux server as an FTP server so that we can keep our files and folders or some data there and it is accessible from anywhere on the internet. Again, this can also be placed behind a particular load balancer. Also, we can configure the security group to be more strict so that only some certain networks can access this FTP server. Like maybe you know which network you are part of from your home or from office, and you only allow those networks to access this FTP server. So we can solidify our security configuration as well. But we will see some of these examples. The core here, the main part here is going to be the VPC and the communication between different VMs. But these are different extra added projects we will do to have the access from the internet and see how exactly the complete service will be set up, right? So this will be the phase 2. So what makes this course unique? So of course, as you know that Zero to AWS program that we have for 52 weeks, which is the pre-recorded solution, that's more certificate centric. So of course you gain in-depth knowledge in that course as well, and you get prepared for the certification, different tracks. But sometimes what happens if you are practicing for cloud practitioner or if you are preparing for cloud practitioner certification, it's completely theoretical and multiple choice questions. So it's nice to have some hands-on as well while going through all that services information and the details of the services. So that's why this course was created so that you can get a hands-on experience also, even if you are just starting with AWS, right? So you see that this needs no prior knowledge of networking or cloud. So even if you don't know anything about networking, we are going to cover that basics into the phase one, so that we are up to the mark for our subnetting an IP addressing use case into the cloud. Same thing for cloud. We will take the grounds up approach here, means what exactly are the cloud services, and how does AWS can help us into different solutions. So as I mentioned, this is a practical way to learn AWS, theory plus hands-on, so that you also can practice, create a free tier account, and start practicing on this if you already don't have the access to AWS. And it completes with a couple of projects so that you get the complete like life cycle. For example, think about Apache web server project you will do. You will need to spin up an EC2 instance. Maybe you want to also attach elastic block storage apart from the default one. You need to associate it with the security group, so you will see the firewall configurations as well. You need to associate it with the VPC according to what subnet you want to put it on. Then you will have to decide, do you want a public IP address here, or do you want to keep it behind a load balancer? And then finally setting up the routing so that we have the reachability from the internet, or maybe from some other VMs which are not in our subnet. They are in some other availability zone or other regions even. So that way we include everything into a project, which we learn separately before this, right? So, and at the end of this course, the objective is that you will be familiar and more confident with the basic cloud services, and you will be able to get a hands-on or go around the different parts of the AWS management console, and see and seek help and get the configuration that you need to do. So this course is actually a good starting point for your certification journey, like AWS Cloud Practitioner or Solution Architect Associate exam. But again, just to be clear, this course is not going to prepare you completely for these certifications, because these are more theory-heavy certifications. And for that, our AWS Zero to AWS course is actually very good, because you get all the information that you need for these exams. But here, we are going to more concentrate on the practical aspect of it, right? Yes, actually, that's a very good point. I see a comment from Mike that I just want to make sure that I don't get a $40,000 monthly usage bill from AWS. So I think that is something that everyone has, that tension or that worry that we should not get a huge bill from AWS. So this is actually a very good point Mike has brought up, because we are also going to cover in our basics of setting up the free tier account. One of the very important thing is to set the alarms. Set the alarms for your different usage and your bill. So let's say if you want to say that my bill should never go more than 10 US dollars in a month, because right now I'm just learning. I don't want to spend hundreds of dollars just for learning things. So one of the great thing about AWS or any cloud service is that you pay as you go, or you pay for the resources that you are using. So once your practice is done, it's always a good practice to terminate your resources, because you don't need to keep them for next time. Next time you can again build them on grounds up, right? And when you terminate the services, you no longer use them, then you no longer pay for them. But in case if you forget to terminate something, because there are so many services, you configure maybe a load balancer, or you requested a certificate from AWS, or maybe used AWS DNS server and created some zones, created some records, and forgot about it. So you don't want to get surprised at the end of the month. So you can create these billing alarms where as soon as it processes $5, $10, whatever the value you have actually chosen for the overall bill from AWS, you will get an email. And you can also set the alarm for 80% of that quota, so that as soon as out of $10, if I cross add $8, I should get an email, so that you know that it is going up now, and you will have time to go back to your AWS management console and stop the services that you are not using. So we will make sure that we do that first before starting getting our hands dirty with this, right? So it will be a good starting point for you. But if you are also a member of the Zero to AWS 52 weeks course, then you don't need to worry. These certifications are also taken care of that in that program. But if you are just joining this live 8-week course, then it will be a good starting point for these certifications. We are not going to cover every exam point in this, because it's a networking basics course, right? And of course, you can ask questions on the Facebook group to me, or you can ask it to anyone. Basically, anyone who has knowledge will be able to reply to you, or maybe they are also thinking about the same question, so they will also benefit from the answer given on that. So I always encourage people to ask questions on the Facebook group. And while you are watching a recorded video on our website, and that time you think of a question, you can also use the comment section below that video, and the question directly will come to me, and I'll be more than happy to answer your question from there, right? So we have a lot of different ways to get the support. This is another thing which makes this course unique, because it's not just training, but you also get support. So if you have some questions, not just about the particular topic that we are covering, but maybe something in AWS that you say, okay, Arpit, can you tell me what is light sail, or how exactly do we use the snowmobile? What is a snowmobile in AWS? And maybe this is not related directly to networking course or this course, but if you ask it on the AWS, on the Facebook group or in the comment section, I'll be more than happy to answer, or direct you to the correct direction, that okay, you can actually read this article if it's a more in-depth or more detailed explanation, right? So the support is always there. And of course, you will get the lifetime access to the recordings and any updates. That makes it unique as well, because you get the live experience, you get the support on the Facebook group, and you get the lifetime access to recordings. Another thing I want to mention is that although this course is only 8 weeks and your Zero to AWS course is 52 weeks, but even after a couple of years, if you have another question and you are asking it on the Facebook group, or sending me a question under the recordings, I'll be more than happy to answer. It's not that only while you are into the course, then only you can ask the questions. You can ask the question anytime later as well, right? And that's why you can kind of say that the support is also lifetime, because you can ask question anytime. Of course, within the realm of that particular technology. So if you come to me and I'll start asking about F5 load balancers, I might not be able to answer. But the particular technology that you have opt in, you can definitely ask the questions about that. Right. And also suggestion and support for the next steps after the course completion. So if you already are part of Zero to AWS, that's great. If you are not, definitely that can be a great next step after this course. And also, what else can you actually do? Or let's say if cybersecurity is your final goal, then apart from cloud, what other services are important for cybersecurity in that direction? So we can also discuss about these things at the end of the course, right? So there are some certain questions people always ask, some FAQs about different courses, especially for this one also. Do I need any previous networking knowledge? So although I think all of you guys have the networking knowledge already, but for this particular course, I'm going to assume that we are going to start from the scratch. So basics of networking, OSI, TCP, IP model, and especially the IP addressing and subnetting, so that we have a refresher along with the subnetting lab. So at least that part doesn't actually hinder our progress when we are going to the AWS part. Can I use my PC for all practical labs, or do I need specific resources? Now, in most of our courses, we use the VMware workstation and we create the virtual machines there. But of course, the whole objective of the cloud resources is to use services on the cloud and not have to use your local resources. So all you need is the PC with the internet connection, so that we can create an AWS management console login account and create a free tier account, set up some alarms for our bill, and then start using it right from there, right? So you don't need any specific resources, to be honest, locally, because that's the whole point of the cloud. I don't want to spend money on my infrastructure. I want to use the rented online infrastructure, basically, right? So definitely you don't need anything special. Is joining live session mandatory? So as I mentioned, that there will be recording of these live sessions as well, but it is always, as I have seen in my personal experience, it's always a better experience if you join the live session, because anyway, it's only once a week. So it's not very cumbersome. It's not very demanding. And joining the live session keep you also into the loop that what exactly is going on in the class currently. And you can ask the questions right there. And also another benefit is that you get a sense of, or you psychologically you feel like you are progressing, Because when you're on your own, maybe you say, okay, I will watch the videos next week, or maybe next week I got busy, maybe the later week. So it's better to join the live session, because that way you can get the complete experience. And of course, if you miss it or if you want to watch it again, the recordings will always be available. So will there be a new practice lab every week? So not every week, because for example, if you're talking about the TCP/IP model, or if you're talking about IP addressing and subnetting concept, that time we might not have a lab. Or I'm talking about the difference between the compute, storage, networking, and database services, explaining the different services. We might not have a lab there, but of course, in the later weeks, we will have the all the labs that I mentioned here into this PPT. Apart from this, what if I get stuck in a lab and can't find the solution? So these labs are mostly, as you can see, these are the labs where we go step by step and configure things on the AWS GUI, AWS Management Console. So because you will have the recording of these sessions, I am going to go through all the labs first, because the idea is not to test your knowledge. The idea is to make sure that you become comfortable with these technologies, right? So you should not have the mindset of testing yourself throughout this course. You should have the mindset of learning, right? So let's say if I'm starting a new lab where I'm going to set up the multi-factor authentication for a user account. So I'm going to go through that step by step on the Amazon Web Console, explaining you exactly what are the aspects that you will need. And because it is part of the recording, you can always watch it again when you are doing the lab, and making sure that you do not miss anything, right? So don't worry, if you get stuck in a lab, you will always have the recordings to watch. And if you think that you understood something at the time of the live session, but now you are watching the recording and you say, no, I don't understand this part, we have the Q&A for that. So you can ask the question for that particular aspect on the Facebook group or under the comment section of the video, right? So basically, we got it covered from all the angles. You don't need to worry. You will not get stuck. But if you do, then we will be here to help. Now, the next question is, how do I prepare for the exam? So exam is a different story, right? This is just the basic hands-on course. But if you have joined, as I mentioned, if you have joined the 0 to AWS 52 weeks course, that will take care of the exam, because it goes in a structured manner. Cloud practitioner first, then the security part, SA, associate and professional, and then for the networking expert, right? So to be honest, this course is also very helpful, because you will write, away, you will start with the hands-on, get a little bit more comfortable with the GUI. So it will help you to identify those theoretical services more that you learn into the cloud practitioner um, um, initial certification, right? Will I have opportunity to ask questions during live session? So in the live session, mostly the Q&A is actually saved for Facebook group or the recording comment section, because what happens is that once we cover the particular live session, any other aspect of it, you should actually watch the video again first, make sure that that part is clear. And then if you think, okay, I still need the answer for this one, or I need extra information about an extra service somewhere, you can definitely ask it there. It's recommended. But of course, within the class, at the end of the session, if there is a quick question, a short question, we can actually cover it here as well. But definitely, any question you can ask on the Facebook group or under the comment section of the video. So what if I have a doubt during the week when there is no live session, or during the off session, like we have the classes, let's say we have this class here every week, but what about the off days where we don't have the class? So that time you can ask the question on the Zoom session. So every Tuesday evening we will have the class, but after that, let's say it's Thursday or Friday, you have a question. Facebook group or the pre-recorded videos or recorded sessions, that's where you can ask the question, right? So that's it from my side. I just wanted to introduce today. So if you have any question, let me know. And thank you guys. So let me allow you to unmute in case if you have any question. And hey, John, welcome.